June 7, 1944, near Puteaux-en-Bessin, Normandy. The damp coastal air hung heavy with the reek of cordite and pulverized stone. A thin, gray mist still clung to the hedgerows, obscuring the precise line between life and sudden death. Inside the cramped confines of a British Sherman tank, Trooper David Copley gripped his loader's lever, his senses screaming from the rhythmic, deafening clang of the engine. This wasn't just any Sherman. It was longer, heavier, and carried a gun that didn't belong. The standard 75mm barrel, a source of constant Allied anxiety, was gone. In its place, a slender, aggressive muzzle brake jutted out, almost ridiculously oversized. This new profile made the crew deeply uncomfortable. It drew the eye. They knew that across the shallow fields, waiting in the gloom, were the formidable Panther tanks of the Panzer Division. Tanks whose frontal armor had, until yesterday, mocked the best Allied gunners. The German tankers, veterans of the East, called the standard Sherman the Tommy Cooker, a coffin that burned fast. Copley and his crew shared a grim, silent understanding. If they were spotted first, they would die. But today, they carried a secret weapon, an attempt to bridge the massive technological chasm forged in the deserts and steppes. They were a Firefly, the whispered answer to the German steel monster. The fate of the invasion now rested on the sudden, terrifying capability of this single, elongated gun. The invasion of Normandy, Operation Overlord, launched on June 6, 1944, represented the largest seaborne assault in history. Yet beneath the strategic triumph of the landings lay a critical, almost paralyzing tactical weakness: the Allied tank problem. By 1944, the Germans had achieved a state of armored engineering dominance unmatched on the Western Front. The Allied armored divisions, primarily British, Canadian, and American, were equipped with the M4 Sherman medium tank. It was reliable, mechanically sound, easy to mass-produce, and critically, easy to maintain. But its virtues ended where the enemy's armor began. The standard Sherman was armed with a 75mm M3 gun, a decent weapon, capable against infantry, anti-tank guns, and lighter German vehicles like the Panzer IV. However, the battlefield of 1944 was increasingly dominated by the heavyweights, the Panther and the Tiger. The Panther, with its sloped frontal armor and lethal 7.5cm KWK-42 high-velocity gun, represented a quantum leap in armor design. The Tiger I, though slower and fewer in number, was an almost mythical dreadnought, fielding the terrifying 8.8cm KWK-36 cannon. Field reports from Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy painted a grim, consistent picture. Standard Shermans firing AP rounds could only hope to penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther at point blank, often less than 200 yards. The Germans, conversely, could destroy a Sherman reliably from over 1,500 yards. This vast disparity in effective firing range meant every engagement became a race for positioning that the Allies almost always lost. An Allied tank troop would often have to sacrifice 1 or 2 tanks just to close the distance enough for a chance at a penetrating shot. This wasn't warfare. It was industrialized sacrifice. The emotional impact on the crews was devastating. Morale was inextricably linked to the protection their vehicle offered, and the Sherman offered too little against the superior German long-range punch. Allied commanders, knowing the sheer production capacity of their nations, demanded a solution, an equalizer, before the breakout from the Normandy beachhead turned into a costly, prolonged siege. The solution had to be simple, rapid, and capable of deployment using the ubiquitous existing Sherman hull. The answer came from British design rooms and workshops, a pragmatic and powerful improvisation that would drastically change the odds. The Allied High Command did not have to design a new weapon from scratch. They already possessed the required instrument of destruction, the Ordnance QF 17-pounder anti-tank gun. Originally developed in 1941 as a static or towed anti-tank weapon designed to be deployed defensively against the anticipated German heavy tanks, the 17-pounder was a revelation. It fired a 7.62 kilogram, 17-pound projectile at an extraordinary muzzle velocity, approaching 3,000 feet per second. This was the most potent anti-tank weapon available to the Allies, theoretically capable of punching clean through the frontal glasses plate of a Panther at standard combat ranges. The immediate challenge was not one of firepower, but of packaging. The immense size of the gun's breech and its substantial recoil mechanism made it a near impossible fit for the M4 Sherman's relatively compact T-23 turret. The volume inside the turret, designed for the shorter, lower-velocity 75mm M3 cannon, was now impossibly constrained. The brilliant, pragmatic solution came from the workshops of British engineer George Witheridge and his team at the Royal Ordnance Factories. They executed a radical re-engineering, rotating the gun's massive breech block by 90 degrees, allowing the mechanism to cycle vertically rather than horizontally within the confined space. This rotation, while solving the core spatial problem, demanded further, immediate compromises. The main radio set, a large, bulky piece of equipment traditionally housed in the turret's rear, had to be moved entirely. It was relocated into a distinctive armored box welded to the rear of the turret bustle, creating a silhouette that, while noticeable up close, provided the only immediate external clue to the tank's new lethal capability. Crucially, the process of loading the gun was made more arduous. The loader's position was effectively eliminated due to the oversized breech. The commander was forced to double as the loader, a sacrifice in crew efficiency for an immense gain in destructive power. The tank that emerged from this frantic modification was unofficially designated the Sherman Firefly. It was the quintessential improvisation of war, ugly, cramped, and mechanically demanding, yet possessing a devastating core. The crew's environment was physically harsh. The floor was instantly covered in hot, heavy shell casings that had to be manually ejected through a small escape hatch, and the new 5-man crew operated under intense physical strain and speed requirements. But the 17-pound shell, particularly when fired using the powerful APC-BC, armor-piercing ballistic capped rounds, and later the APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot, made the discomfort entirely worthwhile. The 80mm to 100mm sloped armor of the Panther was no longer an impenetrable shield. It was merely a target awaiting incineration. The logistical program moved with desperate speed in the run-up to D-Day. Production was overseen by British and Canadian workshops, tasked with delivering hundreds of conversion kits. The target was ambitious: field 300 Fireflies by the time the invasion launched. The Allied commanders understood that their presence was not just a critical tactical boost, it was a desperately needed psychological tonic for the armored crews who had faced years of German ballistic superiority. Fireflies were immediately integrated into existing troop formations on the basis of 1 Firefly to every troop of 4 standard Shermans. This ratio maintained operational uniformity while ensuring that every forward unit possessed the capacity to deliver a decisive, game-changing punch. The German armored commanders, supremely confident in their Panthers and Tigers, watched the beaches of Normandy fill up with what they recognized as the familiar inferior shape of the M4 Sherman. Their initial assessment was predictable: a massive quantitative force that posed little qualitative threat to their armored kings. They were utterly unaware that 1 in 4 of those approaching shapes carried a hidden, lethal sting, a deception that would define the opening battles and force a swift, brutal, and deadly reassessment of their own battlefield invulnerability. The implementation of the Firefly was a multifaceted gamble, shifting the nature of tank warfare in Normandy overnight. The success of the conversion hinged on human factors, technological advantage, and battlefield deception. The human cost and psychological lift. The crew of a standard Sherman lived under a constant psychological burden. They knew the moment of contact with a German heavy tank usually meant a hasty retreat or a terrifying close-range duel, often ending in immolation. The Allied nickname Ronson, after a cigarette lighter, was a cruel, dark acknowledgement of the Sherman's propensity to burn fiercely when hit. This pervasive fear of vulnerability was a crippling tactical liability. The introduction of the Firefly, despite its operational compromises, immediately changed the emotional landscape. Crews of Fireflies, typically volunteers, felt an almost defiant sense of power. They were no longer running. They could now stop and fight. The psychological lift was palpable across the entire troop. Standard Sherman crews, knowing the Firefly was operating in their midst, felt a defensive reassurance. They knew their big brother could now provide lethal cover, forcing the German tankers to momentarily pause their relentless advance. For the first time since the deserts of North Africa, Allied crews felt they had an equalizing force, a crucial factor in maintaining aggressive momentum across the dense Norman bocage. The technological fix and ballistic superiority. The raw power of the 17-pounder gun was the defining factor. Its capability stemmed from its high-pressure firing chamber and superior ammunition. The standard APC-BC round, armor-piercing, capped, ballistic-capped, could penetrate over 130 millimeters of vertical armor at 1,000 yards. When encountering the sloped armor of the Panther, this performance translated into a reliable kill range far exceeding anything the Germans expected from a Sherman chassis. Later, the deployment of APDS, armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition, further intensified this advantage. The APDS used a heavy tungsten core surrounded by a lighter shell casing that dropped away after exiting the muzzle. This dramatically increased velocity and reduced drag, allowing the projectile to punch through over 200 millimeters of armor at the same distance. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The small, dense penetrator rod, traveling at extreme speed, would create a massive spray of incandescent metal fragments, SPAL, inside the German tank, instantly destroying equipment and killing the crew. The Firefly was not just catching up. For a brief critical window in 1944, it was technically ahead in sheer kinetic penetration power. Leadership and the art of deception. Recognizing the tactical importance of the Firefly, Allied leaders implemented strict rules regarding its employment in camouflage. The Firefly was designated a priority target for the Germans, whose intelligence analysts were quick to note the presence of the long-barreled tanks. To counter this, crews were instructed to use deception tactics. The most common was a simple yet surprisingly effective ruse, painting the prominent long barrel of the 17 PDR to match the shorter, standard profile of the 75mm gun. They would paint the visible section of the muzzle brake and the forward length of the barrel in a lighter color, then paint a wide band of dark camouflage paint approximately halfway down, giving the illusion of a much shorter gun barrel. When viewed from a distance or under stress through a tank scope, the enemy gunners would misidentify the tank as a standard, lower-threat Sherman, often prioritizing the engagement of other targets first. This deception bought the Firefly crucial seconds to find a hull-down position, acquire a target, and deliver the decisive first shot, a shot that often determined the entire outcome of the armored skirmish. The successful blending of deception with devastating firepower was central to the Firefly's operational success. Yet the true psychological effect lay with the enemy, who still approached the Allied formations with supreme and soon-to-be-shattered confidence. The success of the Firefly relied equally on exploiting the German overconfidence and mastering the immediate tactics of a close-quarters tank destroyer. German tank crews, particularly those of the elite armored divisions like the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte and the Panzerlehr Division, had developed a distinct arrogance regarding Allied armor. Their confidence was based on the undeniable superiority of their optics, armor, and gunnery. The standard Sherman, being plentiful and visually familiar, was viewed with disdain. German training manuals and intelligence reports consistently underestimated the threat. They called the standard 75mm Sherman a Kraut can opener because it couldn't reliably open their advanced armor, and the derisive term Tommy cooker was common. This deep-seated belief in their invulnerability meant their initial combat approach was often aggressive and less cautious than it should have been. They anticipated a slow, methodical advance, easily repelled by their long-range dominance. When a Firefly was first encountered, the German gunners, citing the familiar Sherman chassis, often relaxed, expecting to close the range or maneuver for a flank shot. This inherent overconfidence was precisely what the Firefly was designed to exploit. The subsequent shock, when a seemingly standard Sherman suddenly fired a high-velocity, small-caliber round that penetrated the frontal glacis plate of a Panther from over 1,200 yards, was a devastating psychological and tactical blow that would ripple through their armored doctrine. The Firefly was not intended to be used as a frontline breakthrough tank. It was deployed as a specialized armored countermeasure, a tank destroyer operating within a troop formation. Its primary tactical function was to neutralize the highest threat on the battlefield, the Panther or Tiger tank. The 17-pounder was far less effective against infantry and soft targets due to its small, high-explosive (HE) shell load, a necessary trade-off for its anti-armor power. Therefore, Firefly commanders operated under strict instructions: stay hidden, prioritize the heavy targets, and fire first. They were often positioned hull down, exploiting the dense hedgerows and rolling terrain of the bocage, using their standard Sherman brethren as bait or camouflage. This technique required exceptional discipline. The Firefly crew would allow the enemy to advance, absorbing the fire of standard Shermans until the range was optimum for a guaranteed penetration. Once the German heavy tank was destroyed, the Firefly would often immediately relocate to avoid counter-battery fire, its distinct muzzle flash being a major giveaway. This hide-and-seek tank hunting strategy forced the Germans to abandon their confident long-range engagements and approach Allied lines with a caution that significantly slowed their response to the Normandy invasion. This period of tactical reassessment, born of the Firefly's surprise effectiveness, reached its violent climax in a series of intense armored battles that definitively proved the 17-pounder's deadly credentials. The moment of realization, the turning point where German laughter turned to cold dread, arrived during the intense, grinding battles that followed the D-Day landings. The Norman bocage, a maze of ancient sunken lanes and thick hedgerows, compressed the fighting range, minimizing the German tanks' long-range advantage. Yet the sheer superiority of their armor still dictated the pace. This changed with Operation Goodwood in mid-July 1944, and then decisively in the early August counterattacks. The most famous, and perhaps most psychologically devastating exchange occurred on August 8, 1944, near the village of Saint-Agnan-de-Kremesnil. The subject was Michael Wittmann, the Black Baron, Germany's highest-scoring and most propagandized tank ace. Wittmann commanded a Tiger tank and led a small counterattack against British and Canadian forces pushing south from Caen, anticipating an easy destruction of the standard Allied column. His overconfidence was amplified by his legend, and he advanced aggressively, emerging from a belt of trees onto open ground. The forces Wittmann encountered were elements of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry, a British armored regiment. Wittmann's Tiger was detected by a troop of Shermans, one of which was the Firefly, commanded by Sergeant Joe Eakins. Eakins, relatively new to the 17-pounder, was in a perfect hull-down position, his long barrel concealed by the high crops and hedgerows. The Tiger, an impervious metal mountain, drove straight into the Firefly's kill zone. Eakins aimed carefully, utilizing the specialized APC-BC round. His first shot, fired from an estimated 1,200 yards, struck the Tiger's side, but glanced off. The second shot, a correction for range and angle, hit the turret bustle, tearing through the thin armor and detonating the stored ammunition.
The Tiger was instantly consumed in a massive catastrophic explosion that blew the heavy turret completely off the chassis. The destruction of Whitman's Tiger I, the symbol of German armored invincibility, by a previously scorned Sherman chassis, was an electrifying moment. Eakins and the Firefly troop then proceeded to destroy two other accompanying Tiger tanks in rapid succession, effectively crippling the counterattack and eliminating 3 German heavy tanks in a matter of minutes. This was not a lucky shot. It was the clinical, verifiable application of superior firepower. German reports quickly confirmed the loss of Whitman, but struggled to explain the nature of the weapon that had achieved such a rapid, clean penetration. The effect was immediate. The myth of the Tiger's invulnerability was shattered. Commanders realized that the battlefield had fundamentally changed, and they could no longer assume the safety of their heavy armor at long range against the standard Allied tank formation. The Firefly had delivered its first resounding tactical shock.
The destruction of Whitman was merely the most visible instance. The tactical reality was being rewritten across the Normandy front. Following this, and similar encounters during Operation Totalize and the intense fighting leading up to the Falaise Pocket, German armored corps began filing reports that were starkly different from their pre-D-Day intelligence estimates. These reports spoke of an unidentified Allied projectile, a shell that was small and unbelievably fast, capable of penetrating the thickest armor from ranges previously thought impossible for a Sherman chassis. The initial German analysis dismissed the possibility of a widespread Allied technological upgrade. They believed the few devastating penetrations must have been achieved by specialized tank destroyers, like the American M10 Wolverine, or by lucky short-range shots at vulnerable points. They laughed at the Sherman, but they did not laugh at the sudden systemic loss of their armored spearheads. The problem was that these devastating hits were being reported across different sectors, against different troops, always originating from the common Sherman silhouette. Tank commanders were instructed to approach engagements with extreme caution, prioritizing flank attacks and ambushes over direct frontal assaults, tactics that fundamentally undermined the German operational doctrine of the Blitzkrieg, which relied on confidence and rapid, sustained armored pushes. The psychological turning point was reached when German crews realized the true nature of the threat. The Sherman Firefly was not a statistical anomaly, but a standard component of the enemy's armored formation. This realization translated immediately into hesitation. A German Panther crew surveying a field of Allied tanks could no longer confidently determine which was the standard toothless Sherman and which was the lethal Firefly. This element of uncertainty slowed maneuver, increased search time, and made German commanders reluctant to commit their irreplaceable heavy tanks to engagements where the risk of sudden catastrophic loss was now exponentially higher. The Firefly had accomplished its mission. It had neutralized the qualitative edge of the Panther and the Tiger by forcing German commanders to treat every Allied tank as a potential threat. The Germans had the best armored tanks in the world, yet the fear of the 17 PDR round and the inability to distinguish its carrier became a strategic impediment more profound than the immediate losses. It was a victory of gun over armor, of ingenuity over sheer mass, and it bought the Allied forces the crucial time and space needed to eventually break out of the stifling bocage and complete the encirclement at Falaise. The era of German armored invincibility on the Western Front was over, violently terminated by a deceptively ordinary American tank hull housing an aggressively British gun. The impact of the Firefly rippled outward, reshaping the dynamics of the war in Western Europe. Its introduction marked a definite shift in the kill-to-loss ratio for Allied armored units. Prior to the Firefly, the exchange rate favored the Germans disproportionately. Post-introduction, the Allied armored formations could now trade blows on a far more equal footing, especially when the Fireflies were deployed correctly. Statistically, the Firefly proved to be the single most effective British and Commonwealth armored vehicle against German heavy tanks. While exact, verifiable kill numbers are often debated due to the confusion of battle reports, it is widely accepted that the Firefly was responsible for the vast majority of Tiger and Panther kills achieved by the British and Canadian forces in 1944. Its presence was a constant drain on German resources, which were already strained by the relentless fighting on the Eastern Front and the Allied air superiority. Unlike the Allies, who could quickly replace a destroyed Sherman, the Germans could not replace a Tiger or Panther. The loss of a heavy tank was not just a material one, but a loss of highly trained crews and irreplaceable operational time. The most visible consequence was the immediate change in German tank tactics. The era of the confident long-range sniping from concealed positions, where the Tiger could pick off Shermans at leisure, was over. German armored commanders became significantly more conservative. They began to prefer ambushes from very close range or defensive hull-down positions, effectively reversing the tactical roles of the tanks. They were forced to minimize their exposure and move under the cover of darkness or heavy smoke screens, often sacrificing maneuverability and initiative. The aggressive, bold thrusts that characterized the Blitzkrieg were replaced by cautious, hesitant advances dictated by the pervasive, if often unseen, threat of the 17-pounder. Verifiable German reports captured after the Falaise fighting showed a distinct concern over the new long-barreled Sherman. These reports often stressed the need to identify and eliminate these specific tanks first, acknowledging their lethality and urging crews to never offer their flanks. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself, prior to his injury, noted the immense difficulty in countering the sheer volume of Allied armor, a volume that was now underpinned by the necessary firepower to stand its ground. The Firefly's success was measured not only in the steel it penetrated, but in the strategic caution it imposed upon a previously fearless enemy. The technological and operational success of the Firefly had profound consequences that extended beyond the British and Commonwealth forces. The American High Command, initially skeptical of the British 17-pounder conversion, was forced to acknowledge the devastating disparity between the German 7.5-centimeter and 8.8-centimeter guns and their own 75mm and even 76mm weapons. While the Americans did not adopt the Firefly conversion itself, its combat record in Normandy served as undeniable proof that the velocity and penetration power of their current main guns were fatally inadequate. The Firefly's example spurred the accelerated development and deployment of American heavy tank destroyers. The M36 Jackson, armed with the high-velocity 90mm gun, and the enhanced M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman with its thicker armor, began to arrive in numbers later in 1944. Furthermore, the American 76mm gun, though still inferior to the 17-pounder, was belatedly given access to high-performance HVAP, or high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, which offered penetration capabilities closer to the British gun. The Firefly, in effect, forced a necessary, though belated, rearmament of the entire Western Allied armored component. Strategically, the Firefly contributed significantly to the ultimate success of the Normandy campaign. The ability to inflict catastrophic losses on the irreplaceable German heavy tanks prevented Hitler from achieving his key objective, throwing the Allies back into the sea. Each Panther destroyed by a Firefly was one fewer tank to block the Allied breakout. The psychological element of doubt that the 17-pounder introduced contributed to the German operational hesitancy that allowed the Great Encirclement at Falaise to succeed, trapping and destroying the core of the German 7th Army. The Firefly was not a perfect tank. It was cramped, its ammunition storage was dangerous, and the commander's dual role as loader was exhausting. However, it was a timely, cost-effective, and lethal solution to a military crisis. It demonstrated that military improvisation, guided by clear intelligence and technical skill, could successfully counter the technological brute force of the German war machine. The legacy of the Firefly is the proof that a well-aimed, high-velocity projectile is the ultimate equalizer on the modern battlefield, neutralizing the perceived advantage of even the heaviest armor. The story of the Sherman Firefly is not merely a technical footnote in the annals of tank design. It is a profound illustration of how ingenuity and willpower can decisively counter seemingly insurmountable technological superiority. The German engineers, in their pursuit of the ultimate heavy tank, the Panther and the Tiger, had created masterpieces of metal and firepower. But in doing so, they had sacrificed the virtues of rapid production and adaptability. They designed tanks that demanded respect. The Allies designed tanks that demanded results. The Firefly, a marriage of American mass production and British ballistic brilliance, represents the moment when the Allies regained the qualitative edge necessary to win the ground war. It was the tank that ended the German laughter. It was a clear demonstration that armor could be beaten, that the mythology of the 8.8-centimeter gun had a counter. The psychological victory it secured was arguably as critical as the number of German tanks it incinerated. It forced the enemy to fight a cautious war, robbing them of the tactical initiative that had defined their early successes. In the end, the Firefly stands as a testament to the fact that war is not solely won by the heaviest hammer, but by the smartest application of the tools at hand. It was the hidden ace of the Normandy campaign, the silent sentinel that ensured the young men inside the standard Sherman tanks had a chance to survive and advance. The long, slender barrel of the 17-pounder remains a symbol of improvisation under duress, a weapon that, born of desperation, delivered devastation and fundamentally altered the course of the war on the Western Front.